I was just devouring as much as I could. He said, this is only $500. I said, what? Okay, next question. I'm going to get some hate mail now. I can already see it. What's the most memorable setup you've done? I had to think about this because we've done a lot of wonderful setups. And so I decided to just sort of talk very quickly about two. These are not by any means the most expensive, and just because they're expensive doesn't mean they're memorable. But these were two that I really enjoyed. First one was a number of years ago. A client of ours who was local contacted me and said, I'd like to buy a system from you. I've just bought a house in France. Can you do the setup for me? And can I buy them from you? And because he's an existing client, we could do it. So made all the arrangements and booked my flight. And as I was booking, I asked if any of the kids wanted to go with me. And unfortunately, only one had the time to go with me, my oldest daughter. So I said, do you want to go to France? She says, I'd love to. So, and then simultaneously, my mentor and my oldest friend at the time had never been to France. And at that time, he was already in his early 70s. I said, why don't you come along? I'm paying. So his eyes lit up. He was all excited. In fact, he was more excited than I was. And so we spent almost a week, 5 days, I think it was. First 2 days were the setup and taking care of the client. And after that, we enjoyed some time in France. And my friend had just the most amazing time. He just absolutely loved every minute of it. Why it's memorable for me is not just the audio setup with my client and so on, but also to have spent the time with my daughter and my friend, because not that long afterwards, my friend developed some health complications and then passed away. So it was good for me to feel like at least he had these wonderful memories before he passed. So that's one example. Another one was when I had to do a similar kind of a setup in England. I was able to enjoy, after the setup, from London, drove all the way up north and then came back down, spent some time with my family in England, and was able to really have a good time exploring London and parts of England. So those are two very memorable setups. This is a question that I've answered before, but I thought I'd talk about it again because it keeps coming up. Why don't you review XYZ brand? Well, from the very early days, I decided that we would only review products that we sell. And the reason is because we want to be very truthful. And sometimes a product that may be popular in the meantime may not be that great. And so if we review it and we don't carry it, it just sounds like sour grapes. It sounds like we're, just trashing products that we don't sell. And I decided, no, let's just talk about stuff that we carry. And then this way, it's going to sound like it's biased anyway, but at least it's our stuff and it's not stuff that we don't carry. The follow-up question then is, your reviews are not genuine. You never say anything negative. Okay. I should explain again how I come to recommending and selling the kind of products that we represent. Very early on, I realized, because at the time we had very little money when we started the business, I realized that we can't make mistakes, because if we make a mistake bringing in a line, we'd go bankrupt right away. And so I developed very stringent criteria about how to choose a product line. And over the years, when I stayed with those criteria, we rarely made a mistake. But when I veered off from the criteria, I almost always regretted it. And so a large part of the criteria helps me to weed out products that I don't like, or I don't like the company, or I don't like the people behind them. And so if any one of those kinds of criteria are not met, I will generally not represent the product. And so because of that, when we review a product from the lines that we carry, almost invariably, it does mean that we're going to like it. Now, how much we like it is something else. We may like this product good enough, but then something else that we carry may be way better, and we talk about that. Just recently, we posted a video about these Sonus Faber Maxima Amateurs, and Lewis came right out at the end and said these are his favorite two-way speakers. His favorite two-way.
Flashback. My conclusion is it's the best two-way speaker I have heard.
Now, we sell lots of great two-way speakers, some way more expensive than these. And he said these are by far his favorite. So if you understand what he's saying that these are much better than, for example, the Daniel Hertz Chiara that we sell, right? I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, but he's telling the truth the way he sees it, and I made no effort at all to try and tell him, no, you're wrong, or did I contradict him during the video? If you watch the video, you will see that I said nothing when he said that. And also, I have certainly mentioned a number of things that are negatives. If you watch our Good, Bad, and Ugly series, you will have noticed that I've made in some cases, some very specific things that I did not like. The shootout of the big integrated amplifiers, if you watch them, you will see that I mentioned quite a few of those things. Just recently, when I posted the Daniel Hertz Amber Midnight video, I mentioned how at the beginning of the audition, I really didn't like the speakers, and how thankfully at the end things turned out well. But certainly, I made mention of it. In fact, I was very clear. Spent quite a bit of time talking about it in the beginning, about 8 minutes of how I was struggling with myself in terms of how bad it sounded to me. So I don't hide, and neither does Mike or Lewis, how we feel. Is it a negative review? No, not in the pure sense that we would pan it. But given how stringent the criteria for me is, in terms of bringing in a line, I rarely would make a mistake in bringing in a line as a result of that. In other words, the products generally have to be extremely good for me to consider them. So anyway, that's my answer to that. Tube or solid state, in particular Macintosh preamplifiers, because Macintosh makes both solid state and tube preamplifiers. And you can extrapolate this to some degree with other brands. Now, I love tubes. One of my first high-end preamplifier was a tube preamplifier, and I fell in love with tubes right away. And I've continued to love tubes to this day. But just like anything in life, there are good tube products and there are bad tube products. Specifically with Macintosh, the tube preamp, for example, the C2700, the C2800s, they are marvelous preamplifiers, marvelous. They've got this liquid, beautiful mid-range, sweet, smooth top end with good detail, nice three-dimensionality in the mid-range, and a big soundstage. The solid state has that warmth, not quite as three-dimensional, but it's warm, it's also a little bit sweet, a little bit forgiving, a little bit laid back, but wonderful detail, better than the perceived detail relative to the C2700, and better bass. When you compare the two, one of them will jump out at you and you choose the one you like. It's really that simple. For me, it's a bit harder because I like both, and thankfully I don't have to make a choice. Now, one way to sort of help with that answer is maybe a tube preamp with a solid state amplifier. This way you have the best of both worlds, assuming that both products are very good. So this way you have the warmth and three-dimensionality of the tube preamplifier with the kick, detail, and speed of the solid state amplifier. So that's my answer to that. Another question. You've stated many times that you love planar and dynamic speakers. They sound so completely different in so many ways. How can you like both? Which do you prefer? It's funny when I read this question because I just went through one of the first questions of all the products that you own over the years. Which one do you regret selling? And of course, the speakers that I mentioned, the vast majority of them were planar speakers. I love what planars do. Magnepans, Martin Logans, old Accustats, although they're to me, not as good. The original Stax ELS 81. That was a sweet little electrostatic speaker. I love what they do inherently well. The speed, the clarity, the transparency that they have. They're just wonderful that way. But they also do certain things that are not so great. They can sound a bit thin. They can sound like they're missing some harmonic richness. They can't play as loud as a dynamic speaker equivalent. They don't have the same kind of bass punch and power that a dynamic speaker has. So both give me different parts of what I love, and it's really hard to choose between the two. Now, planars that you can buy today aren't that many. Magnepan, you can buy models from $7,000, $8,000 and below, which mean that you can actually buy a really good example of a panel compared to its equivalent cone. And the equivalent cone will sound more boxy. It will sound more thick. The airiness, the spaciousness of a good panel like a Magnepan cannot be matched by an equivalent cone speaker in its price range. So if you really value those aspects of a panel, Magnepan is your best value out there, best choice by far, not even close. But if you value punch, imaging specificity, power, to be able to play loud volumes and fill a big room, then a cone will be a better choice for you. So you have to decide what are the characteristics, what are the areas that are most important to you, and then choose according to that. We just, yesterday I think, or the day before, had a visitor from Newfoundland, flew into town, was visiting, but absolutely had to come in because he wanted to buy a pair of panels. And we played in the Magnepans and absolutely loved them. So that is something only you can decide. I can't decide for you. I can tell you that I love both, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do both. But if you can only make a choice, only you can make a decision about that. Okay, next question. What irks you when you read comments? When I was younger, negative comments would irk me. They would bother me first because when I was younger, I had very, very low self-esteem. So when somebody said something negative, somebody said something that was a criticism or an insult, oh my God, I would get very, very upset because I would believe it. As I've gotten older, I've realized that it's just somebody's opinion. It should only irk me or make me unhappy or upset if it's true. And if it's true, then the guy has done me a favor because he's helped me to want to do better, want to be better. So if he's pointing out a bad personality, a trait, or a bad business practice, then I have to thank him because otherwise I would have to pay a business consultant thousands and thousands of dollars to tell me the same thing. But here I'm getting it for free. So I've learned not to take most things personally unless it happens to be true. And the one thing I am about with myself, I'm very honest with myself. I will read the comments. If it's a negative comment, I will ask myself if it's true. If it's true, I'll do better. If it's not true, then it doesn't bother me at all. The other thing to note is that sometimes people are just trolling. They've got nothing to do, or they're immature, they're single, live in their mother's apartment basement or house basement, they're just trolling. And they just want to do something or write something, internet keyboard warriors, trying to get a rise from somebody, And the irony about trolling is that either they know that they're trolling and therefore they know how ridiculous and ignorant they're being, or they don't know, in which case, not my job to tell you how ignorant you are. George Bernard Shaw, this incredible guy, was famous for a lot of sayings, and one of his wonderful quotes is, Never wrestle with a pig. You'll both get dirty and the pig will like it, right? So that's why most things don't irk me. However, there are a couple of widely held beliefs that I do want to address because I don't think that these are correct in any way, shape, or form. Here's one in particular. Speaker companies like Wilson Audio use off-the-shelf drivers and therefore are overpriced as a result. And the corollary is that in-house made drivers are much superior, and therefore you should buy speakers from those companies that make in-house drivers. This is a very, very generalized statement that is in fact not true. Just because a company makes and designs their own drivers doesn't make that driver any good, right? First of all, you have to have many, many, many years of really good experience to be able to design a really good driver. And then you have to have the funds, the resources to have machines to make that driver that good, right? So just because you make a driver doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. I'll tell you a true story. Many years ago at CES, I was walking by an exhibitor and his speakers, he had prices tagged on top of the speaker, and on the surface the speaker looked incredible, looked really luxurious, looked really expensive. And then when I looked at the price tag, I thought, this pair is $1,000? How's that possible? The cabinet alone must cost over $2,000. So I asked them, and they said, yeah, absolutely true. We make them in huge volumes, and we get our cabinets from China, and that's why we can do all this stuff for so cheap. So I started to dig a little bit deeper. Now, this was what they used to call the zoo area. So in other words, big open spaces, no walls, just playing, as loud as it possibly can to overcome the background noise. So as I got closer to the speaker and I was listening more carefully, I realized that this didn't sound good at all. But I thought maybe it's just the room, the environment and things like that. So I decided to take a chance. I bought a couple of pairs to try, and sure enough, when I got them, they sounded crap. They looked gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. The cabinets were beautiful, almost on par with what Sonus Faber makes. But the sound was some of the worst I had ever heard. I took the drivers out, and sure enough, the guy was not lying. The drivers were made in-house. In-house. So what does that, again, tell you? That you can make your own drivers, and they can really, really, really suck. So just because you have a company that designs and makes their own drivers doesn't guarantee that it's any good. Conversely, the drivers that people like Wilson Audio and many, many, many other companies use are from some of the most well-respected, some of the best driver companies in the world. They are literally the finest drivers of their kind. And in the case of Wilson Audio, they actually have these drivers designed and modified to their specifications. And then when they get these drivers in-house, they modify it again. I know this for a fact because I've had the experience multiple times now to have to replace drivers when clients get a little bit too crazy, they play it too loud, or the amplifier blows up and then the driver blows up. I've had to replace these drivers. And when I take the drivers out, you can see that they are not stock, absolutely not stock at all. So anyway, that's one point. The other common belief is that, so again, in terms of speakers, we just had one. Sonus Faber looks great, but sounds like a much, much cheaper speaker. Of course, sound is very personal and very subjective, and so if you, in fact, have heard it and you don't like it, that's your opinion. Absolutely, you're entitled to it, and you're right, because that's your opinion. But if you're just trolling, let me just point this out. I completely disagree. Sonus Faber has multiple patents to their design. They use some of the finest engineering. They have an anechoic chamber. Most high-end companies do not have an anechoic chamber. If you don't know anything about anechoic chamber, look it up. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a good one. Okay, they have state-of-the-art measurement tools. They spend millions of dollars in their R&D. So this is not a company that just looks good and doesn't perform. They actually do. I wrote down here, to me, Sonus Faber looks like Neve Campbell, cooks like Ellen Ducasse, sings like Aretha Franklin, and screws like, I had to leave that to your imagination. That's what Sonus Faber to me is. They are some of the finest speakers in our industry, and we are lucky that this company exists. Okay, last question. You constantly joke about how old you are. How's it like to get old? Out of nowhere, I get an email asking this. I thought, this is interesting. First, you have to understand that I grew up in a British Commonwealth country. And if you know anything about British humor, it's oftentimes self-deprecating. And, like Mr. Bean, you make fun of yourself. And I enjoy that kind of sense of humor. So when I say I'm old or Louis is old, you and I are both old, it's making fun of ourselves. We don't take ourselves seriously. But there is some truth to the fact that, I am old. If you are 30 or 40 and below, I'm old. If you are 70 and older, I'm a young whippersnapper. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. As I've gotten older, parts of my body don't do what they're supposed to do anymore. I wake up in the morning and everything creaks. I have to spend 2-3 minutes stretching, otherwise I can't bend my back. Old injuries keep coming up to haunt me. Bones creak like crazy, just like, sitting in his chair. It's creaking all the time. Things that should get hard don't get hard. Things that shouldn't get hard, like my arteries do, that's getting old. But the other side of it is that I have had experiences that I wouldn't trade for the world. I came to Canada very, very poor. There have been circumstances in my life where I've had to borrow money just to be able to buy food. And then conversely, I've been so fortunate to have owned and played with some of the most exotic cars, great audio, traveled, just wonderful things to have experienced. I've seen my 3 young daughters grow up from kids to the wonderful human beings that they are today. And God willing, I will live more so that I can see grandchildren. I don't have any at the moment. And I'm really, really grateful that this life has allowed me to make lifelong friends and be able to share my audio journey with all of you. So thank you, all of you, for watching. Even if you don't like us, and even if you don't enjoy our content and you comment bad things, thank you for sharing the journey with us, all of us here. And I hope that we will be able to continue to create content that you will enjoy or appreciate, or at least entertain yourselves with, good or bad. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.